The silence in Judge Arthur Caldwell's penthouse was a pervasive, almost palpable entity, thicker than the expensive Persian rugs that cushioned his footsteps. It was a silence measured not in decibels, but in the absence of laughter, of casual conversation, of the comforting hum of a shared life, from his towering eyrie high above the glittering, indifferent sprawl of New York City. Judge Caldwell surveyed his domain, his apartment, a testament to decades of rigorous dedication and an unblemished career. Boasted sweeping views of the Hudson, a state-of-the-art kitchen that rarely saw use, and a vast personal library filled with leather-bound legal tomes and first-edition classics. Yet, for all its opulence, it felt less like a home and more like a meticulously maintained mausoleum, a monument to a life lived largely in isolation. At 62, Judge Caldwell was a figure of formidable authority, renowned throughout the legal world for his razor-sharp intellect, his unwavering commitment to the letter of the law, and a stern, almost glacial impartiality. His silver hair, meticulously combed, matched the steely glint in his piercing blue eyes. When he sat on the bench, draped in the flowing black robes of his office, he was the embodiment of justice unyielding, unswayed, and seemingly unfeeling. He had presided over countless high-profile cases, his judgments rarely challenged. His reputation as a fair but firm arbiter of the law unassailable. He was admired, respected, and feared in equal measure, a pillar of the judicial system. Tonight, like most nights, he dined alone. A perfectly grilled salmon, precisely steamed asparagus, a glass of fine Merlot, prepared by his housekeeper and left for him in covered dishes. He ate slowly, mechanically, the clink of his fork against the porcelain plate echoing unnaturally loud in the vast dining room. His gaze often drifted to a single faded photograph displayed on a polished mahogany side table. It was an old, sepia-toned image, a young woman with a gentle, ethereal smile, cradling a swaddled infant, her eyes brimming with a soft, protective love. The woman was his late wife, Eleanor, and the infant was a phantom limb of his soul, a wound that had never truly healed. The photograph was a constant, bitter-sweet companion, a silent testament to the personal desolation that underlay his public eminence. He often wondered, as he sipped his wine, if the hollow ache in his chest would ever truly subside. His professional life was a roaring success, a beacon of integrity. His personal life was a quiet, relentless ache. Despite the formidable facade he presented to the world, Arthur Caldwell possessed a deep, almost fiercely guarded vein of compassion. It was a side of him few ever saw, a quiet rebellion against the stern discipline he imposed upon himself. Every Saturday morning, without fail, he would shed his expensive suits for a worn tweed jacket and comfortable slacks, and take a quiet drive to a small, unassuming community library in a less affluent part of the city. There, nestled amongst brightly colored children's books, he would spend hours reading aloud to a circle of wide-eyed, often restless, orphaned or disadvantaged children. His deep, resonant voice, usually reserved for pronouncements from the bench, would soften, transforming into a playful chorus of animal noises and whimsical characters. He never sought recognition, never allowed photographs, and politely declined any attempts by the library staff to laud his generosity. He simply showed up, week after week, finding a profound, almost spiritual solace in the simple act of sharing stories, witnessing the fleeting joy on their small faces. He also quietly, anonymously, volunteered his legal expertise at a pro bono clinic, offering free counsel to struggling families, particularly those entangled in complex custody battles or facing eviction. He listened with an intensity that belied his detached public persona, his advice always practical, always delivered with a quiet dignity. This was Judge Caldwell's save the cat moment, a subtle yet powerful revelation of the inherent dignity and profound empathy that pulsed beneath his austere exterior, immediately endearing him to any observer. Arthur Caldwell carried a hidden mark, a silent sentinel of his past, a seed of mystery known only to himself. Beneath the cuff of his impeccably starched white shirt, on his left wrist, a faint, almost imperceptible tattoo resided. It was a small, elegant outline of a swan, its neck gracefully curved, its wings subtly unfurled. It was a symbol of his late wife, Eleanor, who had possessed an almost poetic fascination with the majestic bird, seeing in its silent grace and fierce protectiveness a reflection of true beauty. More than a tattoo, it was a memento, a direct link to his lost love and, implicitly, to the child he had also lost so many years ago, the child who was supposed to have inherited Eleanor's gentle spirit and that very specific birthmark. He often traced the fading lines of the swan with his thumb when deep in thought, a silent prayer for a past that could never be reclaimed, a longing for a future that seemed forever out of reach. Sometimes, his hand would instinctively move to the other hidden element, a delicate silver chain around his neck, tucked beneath his shirt. It held a small, oval locket, tarnished with age. Inside, barely visible, was a tiny, blurred photograph of a baby's cheek, and on it, a faint, almost indistinct, swan-shaped mark. This symbol, ingrained in his being, was a constant, aching reminder of his profound loss, a silent vigil kept for a missing piece of his soul. It was a subtle hint at the extraordinary, hidden value of his past, a secret known only to Arthur, and perhaps to the fate that had so cruelly intervened in his life. The world of law, which Judge Caldwell had mastered, was a crucible of ambition, and within its fiery depths, certain personalities burned brighter, or perhaps simply hotter. Sarah Jenkins, the lead prosecutor on the upcoming murder trial, was one such figure. At 35, she was a rising star in the district attorney's office, known for her sharp legal mind, her relentless pursuit of convictions, and an almost predatory ambition that bordered on ruthlessness. Her perfectly tailored power suits, her impeccably coiffed blonde hair, and her unblinking, analytical gaze projected an image of unassailable competence. She was a Type B misunderstood antagonist, not inherently malicious, but driven by an almost obsessive need to win, to prove herself, and to climb the ladder of success. She genuinely believed in the system, but her definition of justice was often conflated with a conviction, a notch on her belt. She saw the upcoming murder trial, a high-profile case with seemingly open and shut evidence, as her star case, the one that would cement her reputation and pave her way to higher office. To her, the accused was merely a means to an end, a stepping stone on her path to glory. She viewed Judge Caldwell, for all his prestige, as a staid, traditional figure, perhaps too cautious, too inclined to deliberate, when what was needed was swift, decisive action. On the other side of the courtroom sat Daniel Hayes, the public defender assigned to the case, a man in his late 50s. Daniel was a veteran of countless lost causes, his shoulders perpetually slumped, his eyes holding the weary resignation of one who had seen too much and fought too many losing battles against an unforgiving system. His suits were rumpled, his ties perpetually askew, and a faint scent of stale coffee clung to him like a second skin. He was another iteration of the Type B misunderstood antagonist, not malevolent, but jaded, burned out, and deeply cynical. He believed in justice in principle, but had long since stopped expecting it in practice, particularly for his clients, who were often the forgotten, the marginalized, the presumed guilty. He saw the murder case as a foregone conclusion, another notch in Jenkins's belt, another lost cause for him. He viewed his role as merely procedural, a bureaucratic necessity before the inevitable sentencing. He was not actively against Elias, but his cynicism and lack of zeal made him an unwitting obstacle to the truth, a mirror reflecting the apathy of the justice system towards those without power or influence. Unbeknownst to Judge Caldwell, or indeed to most of the world, was the shadow lurking in the periphery, the true architects of chaos. This was the Serpent's Coil, a loosely organized but deeply entrenched criminal syndicate operating in the city's underbelly. They specialized in petty larceny, extortion, and drug running, but their true talent lay in manipulation and exploitation. They preyed on the vulnerable, the desperate, the easily led, weaving them into their intricate web of illicit activities. They were the quintessential Type A villain, driven by cold, calculating greed and an absolute disregard for human life or suffering. They operated with a chilling efficiency, leaving behind just enough evidence to point to a convenient scapegoat, while ensuring their own hands remained meticulously clean. They were the true masterminds behind the murder that would bring Judge Caldwell into contact with his son, having orchestrated the crime to their advantage, and setting up an unsuspecting young man to take the fall. They were the unseen puppeteers, pulling strings from the shadows, their presence a pervasive, sinister undercurrent to the unfolding drama, their true identities shrouded in mystery and anonymity, even as their influence was felt in every corner of the city's grim reality. The judicial system, with its rigid rules and unwavering formality, was about to become the unlikely stage for a deeply personal drama, a collision of past and present, fate and consequence. Judge Caldwell, with his quiet grief and hidden compassion, sat poised on the precipice of a revelation that would shatter his carefully constructed world. The omnipresent gaze of the third-person omniscient narrator allowed the reader to witness the quiet resilience of Judge Caldwell, the calculating ambition of Jenkins, the weary apathy of Hayes, and the sinister machinations of the serpent's coil. This established a profound, dramatic irony, as the reader was privy to the hidden connections and motivations that remained completely opaque to the characters themselves. The stage was meticulously set for a confrontation where true justice would finally be revealed, not through cold legal precedent, but through the searing, undeniable truth of a father's heart. The summons for the Marcus Thorne murder trial landed on Judge Caldwell's desk with the mundane thud of official paperwork, yet its weight felt disproportionately heavy. The case had already saturated the city's media. A lurid tale spun across tabloids and evening news segments, a brutal home invasion, an elderly, reclusive victim found bludgeoned in his modest apartment, and a young, seemingly remorseless perpetrator apprehended mere blocks away. The initial reports, sensationalized and devoid of nuance, had already condemned Marcus Thorne in the court of public opinion. He was painted as a typical street delinquent, a product of a broken system, his vacant eyes and surly demeanor in his mugshot doing little to dispel the narrative of a hardened criminal. Judge Caldwell, however, was no stranger to media circuses or public fervor. He had presided over enough trials to know that headlines rarely reflected the full, complex truth. Still, as he reviewed the preliminary evidence, the grainy surveillance footage of a figure matching Marcus's build fleeing the scene, the fingerprints on a discarded weapon, a small, distinctive locket found in Marcus's meager possessions, reportedly belonging to the victim, a disquieting knot began to form in his stomach. The evidence seemed almost too neat, too conveniently assembled. It fit the narrative perfectly, perhaps too perfectly. He prided himself on his meticulous attention to detail, his ability to spot the subtle imperfections, the discordant notes in the symphony of justice. Here, the melody felt forced, almost rehearsed. When Marcus Thorne finally appeared before him for the arraignment, Judge Caldwell felt an inexplicable jolt. The young man, barely into his 20s, was a skeletal figure, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. His hair was matted, his skin sallow, and his eyes, though undeniably vacant, held a profound, almost ancient sorrow. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, endured too much, and given up. Yet, there was something else there, too, a flicker of something achingly familiar, a flicker that sent a strange, almost painful echo through Judge Caldwell's own guarded heart. It was a fleeting sensation, easily dismissed as the fatigue of long hours or the lingering melancholy of his solitary life. But it lingered, an unsettling hum beneath the surface of his professional composure. This inexplicable connection, this feeling of profound unease, despite the seemingly overwhelming evidence, marked the true catalyst for Judge Caldwell. His meticulously ordered world, built on logic and legal precedent, was now being subtly, yet powerfully, disrupted by an intuitive unease he couldn't quite articulate. The days leading up to the trial were a maelstrom of activity. News vans camped outside the courthouse, eager for any snippet of information. Online forums buzzed with calls for swift, harsh justice. Public opinion was a roaring tide, demanding a swift conviction, a clear victory for law and order. Sarah Jenkins, the ambitious prosecutor, reveled in the spotlight. She moved with an almost palpable energy, her sharp mind already dissecting every piece of evidence, crafting her opening statement, anticipating every possible defense. She saw the case as a grand stage, her opportunity to shine, to solidify her reputation as a formidable legal force. To her, Marcus Thorne was a means to an end, a neatly packaged villain for a public hungry for retribution. She was so convinced of his guilt, so focused on the win, that any suggestion of deeper complexity, of hidden truths, was merely an unnecessary distraction. Justice will be served swiftly, Judge Caldwell, she declared confidently in his chambers one afternoon, her smile a little too sharp, a little too self-assured. The evidence is overwhelming. The public demands a verdict. She was a force of nature, a legal machine, relentless in her pursuit of what she believed was justice, even if it was merely the surface-level kind. Daniel Hayes, on the other hand, moved through the preparations with the weary resignation of a man going through the motions. He had met with Marcus Thorne several times, each encounter more frustrating than the last. The young man offered no alibi, no coherent defense, no discernible emotion. He simply stared blankly, occasionally mumbling incoherent phrases about being safe or leaving me alone. Hayes saw a broken kid, perhaps a drug addict, undoubtedly guilty, caught in a system that offered little mercy to those like him. He believed the best he could hope for was a plea bargain, a slightly reduced sentence, but even that seemed unlikely given the brutality of the crime and the overwhelming public outcry. "He's a ghost, Judge." Hayes sighed during a private meeting, his voice flat, devoid of hope. No fight in him. He barely even speaks. It's an open and shut case, no matter how you look at it. Hayes represented the jaded cynicism of the system, a system that, while designed to protect, often failed those who needed it most, simply by virtue of its weary indifference. His lack of faith in Marcus's innocence, while understandable given the circumstances, nevertheless contributed to the bleakness of Marcus's prospects. The deeper, more insidious current, flowing beneath the surface of the trial, was the unseen hand of the serpent's coil. They were invisible, yet omnipresent. Their network of informants and street operatives kept them apprised of every development in the case. They had carefully orchestrated the crime, planting the locket, manipulating the witness who identified Marcus, and subtly influencing the police investigation to ensure Marcus was the primary suspect. They had even managed to get one of their own, a low-level enforcer, on the jury pool, ensuring that even if a shred of doubt arose, it would be quickly extinguished. Their motive was simple: to eliminate an old, reclusive victim who had inadvertently stumbled upon one of their illicit operations, and to pin the crime on a disposable scapegoat, a young man they had already ensnared in their web of debt and intimidation. They watched the proceedings with cold, calculating satisfaction, confident that their plan was unfolding flawlessly. They were the true Type A villains, their greed and ruthless efficiency operating in the shadows, believing themselves untouchable, unseen. As the trial dates loomed closer, the pressure on Judge Caldwell intensified. News commentators openly questioned his impartiality, urging him to deliver a swift, decisive verdict. Legal colleagues, sensing the shift in public mood, subtly advised him to avoid any appearance of leniency. The weight of his reputation, of decades of unblemished service, pressed down on him. Yet, the persistent unease, the nagging feeling that something was profoundly wrong, refused to abate. He spent hours poring over the case files late into the night, rereading every statement, every report, searching for the missing piece of the puzzle, the false note in the seemingly perfect harmony. One particular detail continued to haunt him, the locket found in Marcus's possession. It was old, tarnished, and etched with a faint, almost imperceptible symbol, a tiny, stylized swan. Judge Caldwell dismissed it as a coincidence, a common enough motif. Yet, something in the shape, the specific curve of the neck, sparked a fleeting, almost painful memory. It was almost identical to the swan on his own hidden tattoo, the one on his wrist, the one symbolizing his lost wife and, implicitly, his lost son. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. It was foolish, a trick of the mind. The human brain, he knew, was prone to finding patterns where none existed, especially under stress. Despite his logical dismissal, the image of the locket and the haunting familiarity in Marcus's eyes refused to leave him. He felt a profound sense of foreboding, a deep-seated conviction that this trial was more than just another case. It was a precipice. He could not go back to the comfortable routine of his life before Marcus Thorne, before this unsettling sense of recognition. He sensed, with a chilling clarity, that this trial, this young man, held the key to unlocking a past he had painstakingly buried, a past that now threatened to erupt with devastating force. This was his point of no return. He was committed, irrevocably, to finding the truth. No matter the cost, no matter where it led, the unraveling thread of the Marcus Thorne case had begun, and it was pulling him, inexorably, towards a destiny he could not foresee. The third-person omniscient perspective allowed the reader to witness Judge Caldwell's growing unease, the superficial confidence of Jenkins and Hayes, and the sinister satisfaction of the serpent's coil, creating a deep, unsettling dramatic irony. The reader, armed with the knowledge of Judge Caldwell's hidden grief and the symbolic importance of the swan, understood the profound, unspoken connections that were slowly, inexorably, beginning to surface. The courtroom air on the first day of the Marcus Thorne murder trial was thick with anticipation, a palpable hum that vibrated through the polished oak benches and filtered up to the solemn dais where Judge Arthur Caldwell presided. The press section buzzed with muted whispers, their pens poised to capture every dramatic turn. Public spectators, a mix of the genuinely concerned and the morbidly curious, leaned forward, eager for the spectacle. Judge Caldwell, cloaked in his black robes, looked every inch the impartial arbiter, his expression unreadable, his gaze sweeping over the assembled faces with customary gravitas. Yet, beneath his composed exterior, the faint nagging unease from his pre-trial review persisted, a subtle dissonance in the expected harmony of justice. The prosecution, led by the formidable Sarah Jenkins, began its offensive with precision and unwavering confidence. Jenkins, impeccably dressed and radiating an aura of steely competence, presented a meticulously constructed narrative of Marcus Thorne's culpability. She painted a picture of a young man, adrift and desperate, who had brutally robbed and murdered an elderly, vulnerable victim for a meager sum. She introduced forensic evidence fingerprints, albeit partial, matching Marcus's on a window ledge near the crime scene, a blunt object found in a nearby alley, bearing traces of the victim's blood and Marcus's DNA, and, crucially, the victim's cherished locket, discovered in Marcus's backpack during his arrest. Each piece of evidence was presented with a flourish, a damning indictment that seemed to leave no room for doubt. As Jenkins delved into what she termed Marcus's troubled past, she called a witness to the stand, a social worker who had briefly interacted with Marcus years ago. The social worker, visibly uncomfortable, reluctantly recounted Marcus's history, a childhood marked by abandonment, a series of foster homes, periods of homelessness, and a growing association with minor street gangs. Jenkins used this testimony to imply a pattern of instability, a predisposition to violence, crafting a narrative that was as much about Marcus's character as it was about the crime itself. She highlighted his lack of a fixed address, his inability to hold down a steady job, and his vague, unverified claims about his early childhood. "Mr. Thorne," Jenkins stated, her voice resonating through the courtroom, "has a history that sadly, tragically, led him down this dark path. He is a product of desperation, and his actions reflect that desperation." During this particularly damning segment of Jenkins's presentation, Judge Caldwell leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Marcus Thorne. The young man sat slumped at the defense table, his eyes fixed on some distant, unseen point. He rarely reacted, a living embodiment of apathy, accepting the harsh pronouncements about his life with a stoic, almost terrifying resignation. It was this blankness, this utter lack of fight, that continued to trouble Judge Caldwell. It wasn't the defiance of a hardened criminal, but the profound emptiness of someone who had simply given up. As Jenkins, with dramatic flourish, concluded her examination of the social worker, Judge Caldwell instinctively reached for his water glass. In doing so, his sleeve caught on the edge of the dais, and a small, delicate silver chain, usually tucked securely beneath his robes, slipped from his neck. The locket, that tarnished oval relic, spun once in the air before landing with a soft, almost imperceptible clink on the polished wood. It rolled a few inches, coming to rest directly in line with Marcus Thorne's gaze. Marcus, who had seemed utterly detached, suddenly stiffened. His eyes, for the first time since the trial began, sharpened, focusing intently on the locket. The small, almost indecipherable image of a swan, faintly etched into its surface, seemed to shimmer in the courtroom's artificial light. A tremor ran through Marcus's slender frame, a flicker of recognition, a ghost of a memory, passed across his gaunt face, so fleeting that it might have been imagined. His lips parted slightly, as if to utter a sound, but no words came. He raised a trembling hand, his fingers twitching, an almost involuntary gesture towards the locket. The courtroom continued its steady rhythm. Judge Caldwell, quickly recovering, calmly reached down and retrieved the locket, tucking it back under his robes with a practiced movement. He glanced at Marcus, whose gaze had now returned to its previous blankness. Though a subtle tension lingered in his shoulders, the moment had passed in a blink, too swift and too quiet for most to notice. Only Marcus, still reeling from the unexpected sight, and Judge Caldwell, whose peripheral vision had caught the young man's sudden, intense reaction, were truly aware of the significance of that fleeting glimpse. Daniel Hayes, Marcus's public defender, was busy scribbling notes, preparing for his cross-examination, his head bent over his legal pad. Sarah Jenkins was already turning to her next exhibit, her focus entirely on maintaining the momentum of her prosecution. The very brief, almost accidental unveiling of Judge Caldwell's deeply personal symbol had occurred, completely unnoticed by all but the one person it was meant to affect. The rest of the day proceeded with the usual solemnity. Witness after witness took the stand, each adding another layer to the damning edifice of evidence against Marcus. Yet, for Judge Caldwell, the incident with the locket had planted a new, unsettling seed of doubt. He found his gaze drifting back to Marcus repeatedly, observing the young man with an intensity that went beyond judicial scrutiny. He noticed the subtle tremor in Marcus's hands, the way his jaw would clench almost imperceptibly, the way his eyes would occasionally dart towards the judge's bench before quickly returning to their distant focus. There was a raw, unaddressed pain in Marcus's demeanor, a quiet suffering that resonated with something deep within Judge Caldwell's own guarded heart. From the shadows, the unseen architects of the crime, the members of the Serpent's Coil, watched the proceedings with a cold, calculating intensity. Their operatives, scattered discreetly throughout the public gallery, were trained to observe every nuance, every subtle shift in the courtroom's dynamics. They had seen Marcus's momentary reaction to the locket, a flash of something uncharacteristic in his usually placid demeanor. They had also noted Judge Caldwell's lingering gaze towards Marcus, a deeper interest than usual. These were dangerous signs, Their plan relied on Marcus remaining a silent, compliant scapegoat. Any hint of recognition, any spark of a past connection, could unravel everything. In a quiet, clandestine meeting held in a dimly lit, nondescript warehouse on the city's outskirts later that evening, the leadership of the Serpent's Coil discussed the day's events. "The kid's spooked," one gravel-voiced figure rasped, a scar running across his left eyebrow. "He reacted to the old man's trinket, and the judge. He's looking at the kid too closely, not like he's just a perp." Another, a lean, sharp-eyed woman with a chillingly calm demeanor, interjected. "We need to ensure he doesn't talk. The plan is too far along. This Judge Caldwell, he's known for digging. We can't have him digging in the wrong direction." They devised a series of contingency plans. First, they would reinforce their existing threats to Marcus, reminding him of the severe consequences that would befall any family or associates he might have if he deviated from the script. Second, they would discreetly monitor Judge Caldwell, looking for any signs of an independent investigation. Third, they would prepare a series of fall guys and false leads, ready to be deployed if the investigation strayed too close to their true identities. Their chilling efficiency and foresight underscored their nature as Type A villains, always several steps ahead, always seeking to protect their illicit enterprise. They were confident that their careful preparations would prevent any cracks in their meticulously constructed facade from widening. They were determined to ensure that the verdict, whatever it was, would serve their interests, ensuring Marcus Thorne would remain a silent, convenient sacrifice. Back in his penthouse, long after the city had dimmed its lights, Judge Caldwell sat at his desk, the locket now resting in his palm. He turned it over and over, his thumb tracing the faint outline of the swan. He looked at the blurred, tiny photograph inside. A baby's face. A faint mark. He thought of Marcus Thorne, his blank eyes, the momentary flicker of recognition. Was it merely a coincidence? Or was there something more? Something profoundly unsettling, lurking beneath the surface of this seemingly straightforward case? The emotional and psychological toll of the day's courtroom drama and the inexplicable connection he felt to Marcus was beginning to erode his once impenetrable judicial armor. The third-person omniscient perspective allowed the reader to witness the growing unease in Judge Caldwell, the unconscious recognition by Marcus, and the chilling machinations of the Serpent's Coil, creating a profound dramatic irony as the forces of truth and deception began their quiet, terrifying dance. The stage was now set for the deepening mystery, for the judge to inadvertently peel back the layers of a life he had long buried. The trial of Marcus Thorne plunged into its second week, a relentless grind of testimonies and cross-examinations, each day weaving a tighter net around the young defendant. The courtroom, once a place of objective legal procedure, had subtly transformed into a crucible of personal torment for Judge Arthur Caldwell. While the prosecution presented its case with unwavering confidence, and the defense seemed content to merely observe, Judge Caldwell found himself battling a deepening sense of unease, a gnawing intuition that defied logic and legal precedent. The initial forensic reports, the witness testimonies, the circumstantial evidence, on the surface, everything pointed to Marcus Thorne as the sole perpetrator. Yet, Judge Caldwell, a man who had honed his judicial instincts over decades, sensed a void, a missing piece in the meticulously constructed puzzle. His internal alarm bells, usually silent and reserved for truly complex cases, chimed persistently. He couldn't shake the image of Marcus's eyes, the profound sadness beneath the blankness, nor the fleeting, almost imperceptible reaction to the locket that had fallen from his own neck. He felt utterly alone in this conviction, a solitary sentinel guarding an unspoken truth that no one else seemed to perceive. The courtroom, his sanctum of justice, had become his personal gauntlet, a trial of his own conscience, where he had to contend with the overwhelming weight of public expectation, the relentless pressure of his peers, and the disquieting whispers of his own heart. The pressure mounted from all sides. Sarah Jenkins, the prosecutor, was a shark in a tailored suit, sensing blood in the water. She saw the case as a guaranteed win, a stepping stone to a partnership in a prestigious law firm, or perhaps even a political career. Her arguments grew sharper, her delivery more impassioned, each word designed to galvanize the jury and leave no room for doubt. During a recess, she cornered Judge Caldwell in his chambers, her voice a low, insistent hum. "Judge, with all due respect, the defense is barely putting up a fight. This is as clear-cut as it gets. The city wants this wrapped up. The victim's family deserves closure. Let's move this to sentencing." Her words, cloaked in professional courtesy, were an unmistakable demand for a swift conviction, highlighting her Type B antagonist role, not malicious, but relentlessly ambitious and blind to nuances that might derail her success. She was a reflection of the system's drive for efficiency over meticulous truth-seeking. Daniel Hayes, Marcus's public defender, offered little resistance. He continued to go through the motions, cross-examining witnesses with a lackluster energy, barely challenging the prosecution's damning narrative. He had long since convinced himself that Marcus was guilty, and his efforts were merely a formality. In private, he confided in Judge Caldwell, his voice a weary drone. "He won't even cooperate, Judge. Says he doesn't remember or just shrugs. What am I supposed to do? He's practically begging for a life sentence." Hayes's resigned apathy, his failure to truly fight for his client, compounded Judge Caldwell's sense of isolation, forcing the judge to carry the burden of doubt alone. The time limit pressed down on Judge Caldwell like a physical weight. The trial was hurtling towards its inevitable conclusion. Each passing day, each new piece of seemingly irrefutable evidence, pushed him closer to the moment when he would have to utter the words that would condemn a young man who, for reasons he couldn't explain, stirred something deep within him. He found himself spending his evenings not in his luxurious penthouse, but in his chambers, poring over stacks of police reports, forensic analyses, and witness statements. He meticulously reread every line, searching for inconsistencies, for any overlooked detail that might betray the truth. His usually stoic demeanor was replaced by a haunted intensity, his sleep fitful, haunted by the image of Marcus's eyes. During one such late-night session, fueled by strong coffee and an unyielding sense of urgency, Judge Caldwell discovered a series of minute discrepancies. A secondary witness, a convenience store clerk, had claimed to see Marcus fleeing the scene. Yet, her description of the fleeing figure's gait and specific clothing details seemed to contradict earlier, less emphasized witness accounts. He also found a single, blurry still frame from a distant security camera, almost discarded in the annex files, showing a fleeting glimpse of another figure near the crime scene. A shadowy form that was taller, broader, and moved with a different cadence than Marcus. It was too indistinct to be definitive, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt, a crucial unseen string that suggested another puppeteer. And then there was the locket found in Marcus's backpack, presented by Jenkins as undeniable proof of his theft. Judge Caldwell had carefully examined it again. He noticed that the subtle swan etching on the locket, while superficially similar to his own, possessed a slightly different curve to the neck, a subtle distinction. He also saw, almost invisible to the naked eye, a tiny, nearly obliterated inscription on the locket's reverse side, too faint to be identified. His own locket, the one he wore, had the swan, but also a faint, almost invisible initial. He couldn't quite remember what initial it was. Was it possible that the victim's locket wasn't the one Marcus was found with? Was there a similar one somewhere? During one particularly harrowing afternoon, while the jury was deliberating a minor evidentiary point, Marcus Thorne was led back to the defendant's table. He seemed to shrink further into himself, his shoulders hunched. As he sat, his arm brushed against the table, and for a fleeting moment, his threadbare sleeve rode up, revealing a small portion of his forearm. Judge Caldwell, who was observing him with an almost desperate intensity, caught a glimpse of it. A birthmark. It was small, faded, but unmistakable. A birthmark shaped like a swan, precisely mirroring the one on his own wrist, the one that had been passed down through generations of his family, the one his late wife Eleanor had possessed, and the one that had been on his missing son's arm. The sight sent a shockwave through him, a jolt that went far beyond professional curiosity, shaking him to his very core. He felt a dizzying surge of conflicting emotions, recognition, hope, agonizing doubt, and a profound, bone-deep terror. He stared, his breath caught in his throat, his heart hammering against his ribs. The courtroom faded into a blur. He could only see that mark, that undeniable symbol of his lost child. He wanted to shout, to stop everything, but he contained himself, the overwhelming revelation trapped within his mind. He needed absolute confirmation. Unbeknownst to Judge Caldwell, the true orchestrators of the crime, the Serpent's Coil were keenly aware of his increasing scrutiny. They had planted a sleeper juror, an operative instructed to push for a swift conviction. They had also subtly escalated their threats to Marcus, ensuring his silence. One of their enforcers, a hulking figure named Viper, had visited Marcus in jail, delivering a chilling message. "Keep your mouth shut, kid. You got no family, no one to protect. But we know where the others are, those that helped you on the streets, your little street family. Say one word, and they disappear." You understand Viper's words, delivered with a cold smile, had been enough to crush any nascent hope in Marcus, any urge to speak out. Marcus's silence, his continued refusal to fight, was a direct result of these terrifying unseen strings of manipulation, a chilling testament to the Type A villain's ruthless control. They believed they had every angle covered, every variable controlled. Judge Caldwell's sudden, intense scrutiny of Marcus, while noted, was dismissed as the eccentric behavior of an aging judge, something that would not derail their meticulously planned outcome. As the final arguments approached, Judge Caldwell was a man on the precipice, teetering between judicial duty and a burgeoning, terrifying personal truth. The legal system, designed to reveal facts, was ironically obscuring the most profound one. His past, buried for decades, was now clawing its way back to the surface, demanding recognition, demanding a truth that would shatter his world and potentially save the life of a son he thought he had lost forever. The third-person omniscient perspective allowed the reader to witness Judge Caldwell's desperate internal struggle, the subtle clues he discovered, and the sinister, hidden hand of the Serpent's Coil, creating an unbearable dramatic irony as the judge unknowingly moved closer to condemning his own child, while the true culprits watched with smug satisfaction. The stage was set for a climactic clash between the cold logic of the law and the searing truth of a father's heart. The air in the courtroom on the day of the verdict was a suffocating blanket, heavy with the collective anticipation of judgment. Every seat in the gallery was filled, and the media row buzzed with a barely contained energy. Judge Arthur Caldwell sat on the bench, his usual air of stoic detachment stretched to its breaking point. His face, though outwardly composed, was etched with an invisible tension, a battle raging within him between the cold demands of the law and the searing, inexplicable connection he felt to the young man standing before him. His gaze kept straying to Marcus Thorne, his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm against the solemn ticking of the courtroom clock. Marcus Thorne stood at the defendant's table, a ghost of a young man. His eyes, once completely vacant, now held a glimmer of something akin to quiet despair, as if he had already accepted his fate, whatever it may be. He looked utterly resigned. A lamb led to slaughter, his fragile hope crushed by the unseen strings of manipulation and the overwhelming weight of the accusations against him. He was a picture of defeat, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the floor. Sarah Jenkins, the ambitious prosecutor, radiated triumph. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips as she surveyed the packed courtroom. She believed, unequivocally, that she had secured a conviction, a monumental victory that would propel her career to new heights. She caught Judge Caldwell's eye, a silent nod of confident expectation passing between them, though Caldwell barely registered it. Her focus was entirely on the inevitable moment of victory, oblivious to the profound personal drama unfolding before her very eyes. Daniel Hayes, the public defender, merely looked weary. He stood beside Marcus, a hand resting lightly on the young man's shoulder, a gesture of hollow comfort. He had done all he could, which, in his jaded view, wasn't much. He too expected a guilty verdict, a life sentence, another statistic in a long line of lost causes. He offered Marcus a quiet, sympathetic look, resigned to the bitter outcome. The clerk's voice, crisp and formal, cut through the silence. All rise. The shuffling of feet, the rustle of clothing, the collective sigh of anticipation. Judge Caldwell stood, and then, in a voice that felt alien to his own ears, began to speak. Marcus Thorne, in the case of the People versus Thorne, based on the evidence presented to this court and the deliberations of the jury. His voice, usually so steady, hitched. His eyes, scanning the solemn faces before him, landed on Marcus Thorne's arm. In that agonizing moment, as Marcus shifted slightly, his threadbare sleeve rode up, revealing a small, faint birthmark on his inner forearm. It was unmistakably there, even from the distance of the bench. A tiny, elegant outline of a swan, its neck gracefully curved, its wings subtly unfurled. It was the same swan from his own hidden tattoo, the one on his locket, the symbol of his lost Eleanor, the indelible mark of his missing son. A profound, shattering wave of recognition, of memory, of absolute certainty crashed over Judge Caldwell. The world tilted on its axis. He saw Eleanor's joyful face, her radiant smile as she presented their newborn son, the doctor's solemn pronouncement of the rare, beautiful birthmark. He saw the fleeting glimpses of Marcus's arm in earlier sessions, the feeling of recognition, the subtle ache he couldn't name. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was his son. His long-lost, presumed dead son, standing before him, accused of a heinous crime. "My son," Judge Caldwell whispered, his voice cracking, the words ripped from the deepest, most guarded part of his soul. The official documents in his hand, the verdict he was about to deliver, fluttered to the polished wood floor. The gavel, still resting on the dais, seemed to mock him with its silent, unyielding presence. "Stop, stop everything I cannot. He is my son. That is my son's birthmark." His voice, though initially a whisper, rose to a desperate, hoarse cry that echoed through the stunned courtroom, a sound of raw agony and profound revelation. This was the electrifying, Nin-Tho bated breath moment, where all hope seemed lost, only to be spectacularly, terrifyingly, resurrected. Chaos erupted. The courtroom, so orderly moments before, dissolved into pandemonium. Reporters leaped from their seats, shouting questions. Spectators gasped, their faces contorted in disbelief. The sheer impossibility, the dramatic, almost theatrical revelation, stunned everyone into a cacophony of shouts and whispers. Sarah Jenkins stood frozen for a beat, her triumphant smile dissolving into a mask of utter shock. "Judge Caldwell, what are you saying?" she shrieked, her voice shrill with disbelief and fury. "This is outrageous. You cannot. You are compromised. This is an insult to justice." She believed, with every fiber of her being, that Judge Caldwell was having a breakdown, attempting to sabotage the trial to protect the defendant. Her face contorted with a mixture of betrayal and outrage, her career dreams shattering before her eyes. Daniel Hayes, equally stunned, simply stared, his jaw slack. The exhaustion, the cynicism, the years of defeat, all evaporated in the face of this impossible, breathtaking revelation. He looked at Judge Caldwell, then at Marcus, his mind racing to comprehend the magnitude of what had just transpired. A flicker of hope, of renewed purpose, ignited in his weary eyes. He slowly reached out and placed a firmer, more supportive hand on Marcus's shoulder. A silent promise to fight, truly fight, for him now. For Marcus Thorne, whose eyes had been fixed on the floor, jerked his head up at his father's cry, his blank gaze, for the first time in years, filled with emotion. He saw the profound, almost unbearable pain in Judge Caldwell's eyes, the sheer, undeniable recognition. He looked down at his arm, at the small swan birthmark that he had always had, a mark he barely noticed anymore, a symbol of a past he couldn't remember. And then he looked back at the judge, at the man who had just claimed him as his son. A tremor ran through him, a mix of utter confusion, a burgeoning hope, and a deep, agonizing sorrow for a past he never knew. Tears, hot and surprising, welled in his eyes, blurring the image of the man on the bench. He had never cried, never truly felt anything, in years. In the back rows, amidst the chaos, a subtle, panicked ripple spread through a small, nondescript group of men and women. These were the hidden operatives of the Serpent's Coil, their faces, usually impassive, contorted with a mixture of disbelief and utter terror. The foolish old judge had seen it. He had recognized the mark. Their perfectly executed plan, their carefully constructed web of deceit, was unraveling before their very eyes. They had controlled every variable, every witness, every piece of evidence, but they had not accounted for the undeniable, visceral bond between a father and a son, a bond revealed by a single, tiny birthmark. One of their leaders, a shadowy figure known only as the architect, watched from a private room overlooking the courtroom, the live feed flickering on a large monitor. His cold, calculating eyes widened in a rare moment of genuine alarm. "Impossible!" he hissed, his voice tight with fury. "Get him out of there. Now secure Thorne. We cannot let him speak." He barked urgent commands into a comms device, his meticulous plans dissolving into desperate damage control. They needed to silence Marcus. And quickly, before he could expose their entire operation. This was the moment their Type A villainy was exposed, their careful manipulations crumbling under the weight of an unexpected, undeniable truth. The shouts in the courtroom intensified. The bailiffs, stunned by the judge's outburst, struggled to maintain order. Flashbulbs from the media section popped like a volley of gunfire. The sheer, overwhelming magnitude of the revelation hung in the air, a truth so stunning, so profoundly personal, that it eclipsed the legal proceedings entirely. Judge Caldwell, still on his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for his locket, his gaze locked onto Marcus, had effectively brought the entire machinery of justice to a grinding upper emotional halt. The verdict, once a matter of legal formality, was now a raw, bleeding wound, torn open to reveal a lost family, a hidden conspiracy, and a destiny tragically intertwined. The third-person omniscient perspective allowed the reader to experience the full, cathartic impact of this climax, witnessing the profound emotional unraveling of Judge Caldwell, the stunned reactions of the courtroom, and the terrified panic of the true villains, all converging in a single earth-shattering moment of undeniable truth. The stunned silence that followed Judge Caldwell's raw, anguished cry lasted only a heartbeat before the courtroom erupted into an uncontrollable frenzy. Reporters scrambled, cameras flashed, and the public gallery dissolved into a chorus of shouted questions and horrified gasps. Bailiffs, momentarily paralyzed by the unprecedented scene, finally sprang into action, struggling to restore order. Above the din, Sarah Jenkins's voice cut through, shrill with disbelief and fury. "This is a farce, Judge Caldwell. You are compromised. You must recuse yourself immediately," she shrieked, her face contorted in a mixture of professional outrage and personal betrayal. Her carefully constructed career, her gleaming victory, was disintegrating before her eyes, and she lashed out, convinced that the judge's outburst was a calculated attempt to derail her triumphant prosecution. Amidst the chaos, Marcus Thorne remained fixed, his eyes locked on Judge Caldwell. The world swirled around him, but all he could see was the raw, open pain on the judge's face, a pain that mirrored the unfamiliar ache in his own chest. He looked down at the swan-shaped birthmark on his forearm, then back at the man on the bench. The words, "my son," echoed in his mind, a foreign, impossible concept that simultaneously terrified and thrilled him. A torrent of fragmented, blurry images flickered through his mind, a woman's gentle touch, a whispered lullaby, a feeling of warmth and safety he hadn't known since childhood. He swayed slightly, overwhelmed by the sudden, brutal onslaught of emotion. Just as the pandemonium threatened to engulf the entire courtroom, a team of plainclothes officers, already discreetly positioned in the gallery as part of the initial The Serpent's Coil surveillance operation, though their true purpose was unknown to most, moved swiftly. Their eyes, unlike the rest of the stunned crowd, were not on Judge Caldwell or Marcus, but on the small group of individuals associated with the crime syndicate who had been observing the trial. These operatives, having received the architect's frantic commands, were already attempting to melt into the fleeing crowd, their faces etched with panic. But the officers, anticipating such a move, were faster, quietly, efficiently. They moved to intercept, pulling the key figures from the throng and escorting them out of the courtroom, their actions barely noticed amidst the general chaos. This immediate, decisive action was a direct consequence of Judge Caldwell's revelation, triggering the swift and undeniable downfall of the Type A villain. The trial, of course, was immediately suspended. Judge Caldwell, still reeling, was gently led from the bench by an older, compassionate bailiff, his personal locket clutched tightly in his hand. The initial news reports were sensational, scandalous, bordering on the unbelievable. Judge declares defendant, his son in shocking courtroom drama, is justice blind or just broken. The legal community was in an uproar, with calls for investigations into Judge Caldwell's conduct. However, the tide swiftly turned. Under Judge Caldwell's personal, unwavering guidance, a secret, high-level investigation was launched. Utilizing his vast network of contacts within the FBI and specialized investigative units, he personally oversaw the meticulous unraveling of the Serpent's Coil. Working from an undisclosed location, Marcus, under strict protection, slowly, painfully, began to recall fragments of his childhood, pieces of his past with the gang, and the horrifying truth of how he had been manipulated. He described being lured into the syndicate as a vulnerable teenager, trapped by debt and threats against other street kids he considered his family. He recounted how they had forced him to participate in minor crimes, slowly escalating until the night of the murder. He revealed that he had been sent to rob the victim, but that the actual killing had been committed by one of the Serpent's Coil leaders, a brutal enforcer named Viper, who had then planted key evidence and threatened Marcus into taking the fall. The locket found in Marcus's possession was not the victim's. It was Marcus's own, given to him by his street guardian, a kind older woman who had also, unknowingly, borne a swan tattoo, a simple motif she liked, and who had often called him "my little swan." The victim's locket had been a cheap replica, planted to implicate Marcus. As the full scope of the Serpent's Coil's manipulation and violence became clear, the initial outrage directed at Judge Caldwell shifted to widespread public awe and sympathy. The true villains, who had preyed on the vulnerable and almost sent an innocent man to prison for life, were systematically apprehended. The architect, the mastermind behind the syndicate, was traced through his financial dealings and clandestine communications, eventually cornered in a lavish hidden lair. Viper, the actual killer, was caught attempting to flee the country. In a series of swift, coordinated raids, The entire organization was dismantled. The evidence of their manipulation, their intricate web of false testimonies and planted clues, was undeniable. The members of the Serpent's Coil were brought to justice, facing a barrage of charges ranging from murder to conspiracy and racketeering. Their reign of terror, built on shadows and exploitation, collapsed under the weight of the truth. This was the deserved, comprehensive downfall of the Type A villains, a powerful testament to the triumph of justice. In the aftermath, the public perception of Sarah Jenkins underwent a significant shift. Initially outraged by Judge Caldwell's actions, she had been a vocal proponent of his immediate recusal. However, as the overwhelming evidence against the Serpent's Coil emerged, revealing the extent of their manipulation and the innocence of Marcus Thorne, Jenkins was forced to confront her own tunnel vision. She realized that her relentless pursuit of a conviction, her focus on winning at all costs, had blinded her to the deeper truths of the case. Her ambition, while driving her, had also made her susceptible to manipulation and prevented her from truly seeking justice. A few weeks after the Serpent's Coil was dismantled, Jenkins sought a private meeting with Judge Caldwell and Marcus. She walked into the room, her usual confident stride replaced by a tentative humility. Her sharp features, usually so unyielding, were softened by genuine remorse. "Judge Caldwell." "Marcus," she began, her voice unusually quiet, almost trembling. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. My focus on closing the case, made me blind. I allowed myself to be manipulated by the evidence, to ignore the nuances, to overlook the humanity of the situation. I am profoundly sorry for the injustice I almost perpetrated against you, Marcus, and for doubting your integrity. Judge, it was a heartfelt, unreserved apology, a profound act of self-reflection and humility that truly marked her transformation from a Type B misunderstood antagonist to an ally. She then offered her legal expertise to Judge Caldwell's new endeavors, pledging to dedicate her considerable talents to fighting for those wrongfully accused. Similarly, Daniel Hayes, Marcus's weary public defender, experienced a powerful resurgence of his former passion for justice. The discovery of Marcus's innocence, and the dramatic personal connection to Judge Caldwell, had jolted him out of his cynical resignation. He realized that his apathy, his belief that the system was too broken to fight, had nearly condemned an innocent man. He visited Judge Caldwell and Marcus, his eyes shining with a renewed spark. "I let cynicism get the better of me," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have fought harder, looked deeper. I'll never let that happen again." He volunteered to work alongside Judge Caldwell on the cases of the wrongfully accused, his vast experience now tempered with a renewed fire. Both Jenkins and Hayes, once unwitting obstacles, became invaluable allies, their public acts of humility cementing their atonement. The revelation of Marcus's identity and the subsequent dismantling of the Serpent's Coil brought a profound shift in Judge Arthur Caldwell's life. While he was fully exonerated by the internal investigation, the experience had irrevocably altered his perspective on justice. He understood now that true justice extended beyond the cold letter of the law. It encompassed compassion, rehabilitation, and a relentless pursuit of truth even when the facts seemed clear. With a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in decades, Judge Caldwell made a monumental decision. He formally resigned from the bench, not in disgrace, but with a profound sense of clarity about his new calling. He immediately channeled his considerable wealth and legal acumen into establishing the Swan's Hope Foundation. Qui Hai Vong Tien Na. This nonprofit organization was dedicated to two crucial missions, providing pro bono legal defense for individuals wrongfully accused, especially those from marginalized communities, and offering comprehensive support, including housing, education, and psychological counseling, for children and young adults who had been ensnared by criminal organizations or who had lost their families. This was his profound new opportunity, a purpose that transcended his former career, directly addressing the very injustices he had witnessed and, in Marcus's case, almost inadvertently perpetrated. For Marcus Thorne, The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The haunted, empty shell of a young man slowly, painstakingly, began to heal. He endured months of intensive therapy, processing the trauma of his past, the manipulation by the gang, and the astonishing revelation of his identity. He had been abandoned as an infant after his mother's death, found by a kind, elderly street woman with a swan tattoo who took him in, but was later taken by social services, only to fall through the cracks of the foster care system and eventually into the clutches of the serpent's coil. Now, he had a name, a family, and a future. Judge Caldwell, now Arthur, became his unwavering anchor. They spent countless hours together, slowly rebuilding a relationship that had been tragically severed for decades. Arthur recounted stories of Eleanor, of their joyful anticipation of Marcus's birth, of the tragic accident that took Eleanor's life, and the mysterious disappearance of Marcus from the hospital shortly after. Marcus, in turn, shared the harrowing details of his life on the streets, his desperate fight for survival, and the constant fear that had been his companion. Their conversations were filled with tears, painful revelations, and a burgeoning, undeniable love. This deeply personal, contemplative conversation allowed them to bridge the chasm of lost years, to understand each other's journeys, and to begin the profound process of healing and reunification. The swan birthmark, once a painful reminder of loss, was now a powerful symbol of their unbreakable bond, a beacon of hope for a future they could now build together. The broken harmony of their lives was beginning to resonate, full and true. 5 years later, the hallowed halls of justice that once defined Judge Arthur Caldwell's life had been exchanged for a different, yet equally profound purpose. The formidable Judge Caldwell, renowned for his stern demeanor and unwavering adherence to the law, was now simply Arthur, a man whose silver hair was often delightfully disheveled, his sharp blue eyes softened by a warmth that touched all who met him. At 67, he moved with a quiet grace, his hands no longer clutching gavels, but instead gently guiding young, hopeful faces. His elegant penthouse, once a lonely fortress, now buzzed with the vibrant energy of meetings, workshops, and the occasional joyful chaos of children. He had truly found his calling beyond the bench. Arthur dedicated his life to the Swan's Hope Foundation, the nonprofit he had founded, named for the powerful symbol that had reunited him with his son. The foundation had grown exponentially, becoming a beacon of hope for countless individuals. Its twin missions, providing free legal aid for those wrongfully accused and comprehensive support for young people caught in the crosshairs of crime or abandonment, were realized through Arthur's tireless efforts. He leveraged his extensive network, his profound legal knowledge, and his substantial personal wealth to build a formidable team of lawyers, social workers, and counselors. The foundation ran shelters, funded educational scholarships, and provided psychological support, ensuring that young lives, once derailed by circumstance or malice, found a path to redemption and purpose. Arthur often conducted seminars himself, teaching aspiring legal professionals about the crucial balance between justice and compassion, frequently referencing Marcus's case as a powerful example of how truth can be hidden in plain sight. Marcus Thorne, now 27, stood tall and resolute, a testament to the transformative power of love and opportunity. The haunted, gaunt youth from the courtroom was gone, replaced by a young man with clear, determined eyes and a quiet strength. After years of intensive therapy and unwavering support from his father, Marcus had not only healed from his past traumas, but had channeled his experiences into a powerful force for good. He had pursued a law degree, graduating with honors, and was now a leading advocate for the Swan's Hope Foundation. His personal story, shared openly and without shame, resonated deeply with the young people the foundation served. He often spoke at conferences, his voice calm yet compelling, recounting his journey from the streets to the courtroom, from despair to purpose. "I know what it's like to feel invisible," he would tell audiences, his gaze unwavering. to be judged before you're seen. The swan's hope gave me back my voice, my name, my future. And we will do the same for you. He was a living embodiment of the Foundation's mission, a powerful symbol of redemption and the profound human capacity for change. He worked side by side with his father, their bond a living testament to the power of family and forgiveness, a shared legacy built on a foundation of lost time and regained hope. The ripples of their story had spread far and wide, influencing even those who had initially contributed to Marcus's plight. Sarah Jenkins, the once ambitious prosecutor, had undergone a significant and humbling transformation. The Marcus Thorne case had been a stark, public lesson in the dangers of blind ambition. While she continued her career as a prosecutor, her approach was fundamentally altered. She now championed prosecutorial discretion, advocated for diversion programs for young offenders, and meticulously scrutinized every piece of evidence, seeking truth rather than merely convictions. She became a devoted ally and board member of the Swan's Hope Foundation, offering her legal expertise pro bono, working tirelessly to undo the very injustices she had once unwittingly contributed to. Her sharp intellect was now tempered by a profound empathy, a quiet act of paying it forward that spoke volumes about her genuine remorse and enduring commitment to a more just system. Daniel Hayes, the weary public defender, had found a renewed sense of purpose. While he eventually retired from full-time practice, he remained a highly respected legal consultant for the Swan's Hope Foundation. His cynicism had been replaced by a quiet, fervent dedication. He mentored young public defenders, sharing his wisdom and imparting the crucial lesson of fighting for every client, regardless of the odds, reminding them that every individual had a story, and every story deserved to be heard. He and Arthur often shared quiet moments, reflecting on the profound twist of fate that had brought them together, a bond forged in the fires of an almost tragedy. The fate of the Serpent's Coil served as a stark warning. The architect and Viper, along with other key members of the syndicate, were eventually convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Their intricate network was dismantled, their illicit operations crippled. The exposure of their brutal manipulation of Marcus Thorne became a nationally recognized case study in how organized crime preys on the vulnerable, reinforcing the need for vigilance and robust social safety nets. Their public disgrace and imprisonment was a fitting conclusion to their Type A villainy, a clear triumph of justice over ruthless greed. One crisp autumn afternoon, 5 years after the trial, Arthur and Marcus found themselves walking through a small, vibrant community center in a bustling inner-city neighborhood, a place where the Swan's Hope Foundation operated one of its most successful youth programs. The air hummed with the joyful sounds of children laughing, music playing, and teenagers working on art projects. They paused by a brightly painted mural, a collaborative piece by the program's participants, depicting soaring swans against a backdrop of a sunrise. Arthur turned to Marcus, a profound sense of peace settling over his features. "You know, son," he said, his voice soft, "for so many years, that birthmark was a symbol of what I had lost, a painful reminder of Eleanor, and of you. But now it's a symbol of hope, of second chances, of justice, of us." He gently placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus looked at his father, his eyes shining with a deep, abiding love. "It's a symbol of what we found, Dad," he corrected, a gentle smile gracing his lips. "And what we're building for others." He then lowered his sleeve slightly, revealing the small swan birthmark on his forearm, a silent testament to their shared journey. In a parallel gesture, Arthur subtly adjusted his own sleeve, revealing the faint, matching tattoo on his wrist. They stood there for a moment, two men who had been separated by an unimaginable tragedy, reunited by a twist of fate, and now bound by a shared purpose. The laughter of the children around them swelled, a vibrant, living testament to the future they were so diligently crafting. The symbolic final image of the swan, once a private, aching wound, now a public emblem of healing and enduring hope, perfectly encapsulated the story's theme that even from the depths of despair and injustice, the most profound forms of love and legacy can emerge, radiating a beacon of light for all to see. Their lives, once defined by loss and isolation, now resonated with a vibrant, unbroken melody of compassion and purpose. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.